Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining me for another video. Today I'm continuing my series on the Gilmore Girls. In case you missed it, I've been doing a bit of a deep dive into the relationships in the Gilmore Girls TV series. I have a playlist and so far I've done Richard and Emily's relationship, Luke and Lorelai, Rory and Dean, and now today we are going to do Rory and Jess. Now I have to say Rory and Jess's relationship is one that I've had mixed feelings about, and I know that there are some die-hard Team Jess fans out there, so I apologize in advance, but I am going to be, let's say, relatively critical of this dynamic. But remember that I look at this through the lens as a family lawyer in a more, what would this look like if this were reality type of a way, because I want to unpack some of these unrealistic tropes that we often see in TVs and movies. The same way that perhaps a nutritionist might criticize Lorelai and Rory's eating habits. It's fine in the show, but if this were reality, you probably wouldn't want to eat Pop-Tarts every day. No offense to the Kellogg's Corporation, but... So I have a lot to say about Rory and Jess's relationship, but before we dive in, if you're new here, my name is Tanya and I'm a family lawyer and mediator. And on this channel, I like to talk about all things related to relationships, from dating to divorce. If that sounds like something you're interested in, I'd love for you to subscribe and join me here. And if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comments below. So we first meet Jess in the second season when he comes to live with Luke, who's his uncle. We find out, or we are told, that Jess has been getting into trouble, although it isn't explained exactly what sort of trouble he's been getting into. Jess's mom, Liz, is Luke's sister. Now we will later meet Liz, but for now we don't know who she is. We've never heard of Luke having a sister or a nephew, but then again, Luke's been a bit of a mystery. He's just that type of character. Straight off the bat, Jess is the bad boy. He smokes, he drinks. As soon as he arrives into town, you can see that he really does not like the Stars Hollow vibe. He's not that sort of wholesome, charming, small town type, the way that Dean is. Even though Dean came from Chicago, by the way, but that's a whole other thing, and I talked about Dean in the previous episode that I did on Rory and Dean's relationship, so you can go watch that if you haven't seen it. But the point is, Dean is so much more Stars Hollow in that wholesome, white picket fence type of a way. Jess is the complete opposite. He's the black sheep. Right away he doesn't fit in, and right away he starts causing trouble. And everybody pretty much doesn't like him. The only person that he seems to like at all is Rory. And it becomes clear pretty early on that he is interested in Rory. Now, remember at this point, Rory is still with Dean. And again, I touched on this in the Dean and Rory episode, but Dean and Jess end up in a little bit of a competition for Rory's attention. But Jess very much deliberately inserts himself into Rory's life in a way that is, in my opinion, fairly disrespectful. You see, when Dean liked Rory and he was pursuing her, at one point he kind of let her know, look, I like you, and if you don't like me that way, then, you can tell me and I will leave you alone. And I'm sorry if I have been bothering you, which I think is a very mature way to handle a situation like that. Probably mature beyond their years. And just like with Dean, I'm going to give Jess a little bit of grace because he's a teenager, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he continues to pester Rory or find reasons to run into her, to pick fights with Dean, and to generally make things uncomfortable between her and Dean, almost deliberately. And by almost, I mean clearly deliberately. So this to me is the first real red flag when it comes to Jess. Now Rory, for her part, is not innocent in these interactions. Over time we see that Rory is interested in Jess. She finds him intellectually a lot more interesting or stimulating than Dean. Jess is a very intelligent kid. He reads a lot. They have similar tastes in books and movies and music. So they connect on that level in a way that Rory, I think, never really connected with Dean. However, this is the problem. You see, because this dynamic is a common trope that we see in TV and movies. It's the bad boy with a rough upbringing who meets the kind of good girl and falls in love with her, and then through his love of her can be redeemed. And unfortunately, in reality, what often happens is that the girl, in trying to save the boy, will end up being destroyed herself. He ends up dragging her down because the truth is that guys like Jess, they just are very angry, very hurt. They've been through some kinds of trauma, and they are often on a downward self-destructive spiral. And any woman who tends to try to save them, help them, get involved with them in any way, just ends up getting dragged down into that self-destructive spiral with them. So as much as I can have empathy for Jess's character, because when we later meet Liz, it does become clear that Jess has had a very difficult childhood. His father abandoned him when he was a baby and left his mother to raise him on her own. His mother has very clearly made many questionable decisions with the men that she has chosen to bring into their lives. This is something that Luke and Jess discuss when Liz comes into the picture much later on in the series and has yet again another man. And from what Luke describes, it sounds like she has had a lot of trouble in her romantic relationships, and that this has probably affected Jess significantly because it caused a lot of turmoil in his own life and a lot of instability. And again, he was getting into trouble clearly in response to his unstable and difficult upbringing. So while I understand all of that, I still do not think that it is wise or safe for any woman to get involved with a guy in that situation. And as you will see in Rory and Jess's relationship and the way that it plays out, that dynamic kind of becomes clear. But again, because it's TV, and specifically because it's the WB, and so it's all very PG, I didn't mean to rhyme so much there, sorry, but anyway, yeah, because of that, it's not so destructive for Rory as it actually could be in real life. So let's go through a little bit of that, shall we? So first of all, Rory tends to make terrible decisions when it comes to Jess, and we see it right from the beginning. You see, Lorelai does not like Jess, Lorelai being Rory's mom, of course. And as I said in the Dean and Rory episode, Rory and her mom have a weirdly close, almost codependent relationship. So when Jess comes into the picture and Lorelai doesn't like him because she sees in him the difficulties, she sees that he's a really angry kid on this sort of self-destructive path, and she doesn't want Rory to get involved. Rory, knowing this, starts to hide things from her mother. This is always, to me, a red flag. If you feel like you need to hide your relationship or things that are happening in your relationship from those who are close to you, especially when you generally have a good relationship with those people, then that should make you question the relationship. So Rory does hide various things about the time she's spending with Jess or the fact that she likes him from her mother, knowing that her mother doesn't approve. And again, as I established in the Rory and Dean episode, Rory is a people pleaser. But this ends up working against her when it comes to Jess, because as soon as she starts to develop feelings for him, being a teenage girl and being a people pleaser, she starts wanting his approval, and this causes her to do things that she would otherwise not do, and that are usually pretty self-destructive. For example, and by the way, all of these examples are before they even start dating. I'll get to that in a moment. But when she's asked to tutor Jess by Luke, she agrees, and she's trying to tutor him he's messing around, and then he suggests that they go get ice cream, which she agrees to, even though she was there to tutor him. So when they're driving around after they get the ice cream and he's driving her car, he says, I could go this way and we could go back to Luke's and continue studying, or we could drive around a bit. Now, he doesn't actually tell Rory, I want to just drive around a bit, but it's very clear in his insinuation that that's what he would like. And of course, Rory agrees to that because she likes him and she wants him to like her, I suppose. So she says, yeah, let's drive around a bit, even though that was really kind of the irresponsible decision to make, and one that Rory, as we had come to know her up to that point, would not have made in other circumstances. And certainly Dean would never have suggested that they should put off doing work in order to go get ice cream and drive around. The result of this bad decision is that they end up getting into a car accident. Now, Rory maintains that it was an accident, that Jess couldn't have prevented it, whatever. At the end of the day, guys like Jess, they always attract these types of problems. It's always an accident. It's always, oh, he didn't mean to. And yet somehow they consistently always hurt the people around them and the people closest to them. Whether they mean to or not, I don't know. Whether they have some sort of bad mojo attached to them, I can't say. But I've seen it enough to know that guys like Jess attract trouble, they create trouble, and if you are with them, you will end up creating and or attracting trouble yourself. Another good example of this is after the accident, when Jess goes back to New York for a time, Rory calls him. They speak, and then she decides to skip school to go and meet him at this park that he mentioned when they'd spoken on the phone. Or maybe he called her, actually. You know what? I'm not even really sure. Either way, they spoke on the phone, and he mentions that he spends his time reading at this park. I don't know why he's not in school, but that's a whole other thing. And she decides one day that she's going to skip school, take a bus, go over to New York, and meet him at this park. Once again, it's Rory making terrible decisions because of her feelings for Jess and her wanting Jess to like her and wanting to connect with him. And in the end, again, what happens? An unfortunate set of circumstances leads her to miss her mother's graduation from the business course that she was doing at the time. And while, again, you can say, oh, well, it wasn't Jess's fault. He didn't actually do anything. He didn't make the bus late. He didn't cause this. Again, it's just another example of how guys like this always somehow end up in those situations. It's like they have some type of curse, some type of negative energy attached to them, that things just always go wrong in their presence and when they are involved. And again, Rory doing something with him ended up putting her in a situation where everything went wrong. And I feel like this consistently happens with her and Jess. And it's like she doesn't take the hint. She can't see that Jess is bad for her. I mean, again, she's a teenager, so I will give her grace in that respect. But I want you to notice, because that's the tendency that we have, is just to make excuses. Oh, it wasn't his fault. Oh, the thing, the animal ran out into the road. Oh, the bus was late. Oh, this, oh, that. But at the end of the day, the common denominator is always Jess. And it's always like Rory does something she's not supposed to do because of Jess. And as a result, circumstances are such that something bad happens. That's the pattern, and Rory fails to see it. And so despite this, and despite the fact that they kind of become increasingly worse and worse, I mean, a car accident and her missing her mother's graduation, she still continues to pursue this relationship. Oh, and let's not forget that when Jess does come back into town, after his hiatus, I suppose, he basically crashes Suki and Jackson's wedding. And then what does Rory do? She kisses him, and then she tells him not to tell anyone, and then she goes off and spends the summer in DC. So it's like, bad decision after bad decision. Well, not the summer in DC part, but like the kissing him and then not breaking up with Dean. But I talked about her dragging the relationship out with Dean in that episode. So I won't go into that again, but I will say that, Rory is not innocent, but it is very clear that Jess has a very negative influence on her. So fast forward to Jess and Rory dating after the whole breakup with Dean at the dance scenario. Unfortunately, things don't get better because you see, Jess pursued Rory when she was with Dean. He was combative with Dean. He was jealous, and he basically treated her like a prize to be won, which he did win. But once he won her, it was like he didn't know what to do with her. He was a terrible boyfriend. He didn't really make plans with her. He would regularly stand her up or suggest that they catch up at some time later, but then never call her. He had no friends, nobody liked him, and as a result, Rory became isolated. Lane even made a joke about it, saying that her and Jess were like an old agoraphobic couple, which, coming from her best friend, should have been another sign that this relationship really wasn't healthy or good for her in any way. While they were dating, Jess also started to become more and more distant with her emotionally, and it was clear that there were things going on in his life that he was not sharing with Rory, and he was shutting her out, and he was becoming increasingly unpleasant and even rude and combative with her. And this dynamic is actually really common in situations where the woman is doing really well for herself and is really on a trajectory where she's going places, and the guy is not. And this often brings up issues of insecurity and jealousy. While in the pre-dating part of their relationship, Jess was clearly jealous of Dean because Dean was with Rory, and he wanted to be with Rory because he liked her. Once he's with her, it's like he's still kind of jealous. But now the person he's jealous of is Rory herself. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense from his perspective. You see, their lives almost mirror each other, but they have very different outcomes because Rory, like Jess, was also raised by a single mother and also didn't have her father in the picture. But you see, unlike Jess, Rory's mother provided her with a lot of stability, both physical stability, but also emotional stability. She wasn't bringing around lots of random guys into her life. In fact, we know from a conversation that Lorelai has later on with Anna Nardini, totally different character, unrelated, not important. We know from that conversation that Lorelai was very reluctant to bring around any man into her life while Rory was growing up. In fact, the first man, as far as we're aware, that Lorelai got serious with and that Rory actually knew and had contact with was her teacher, Max Medina. And that was when she was 16. So she didn't have that unstable upbringing. And then also you have the fact that Rory had her grandparents in the picture who were supportive, not just of her, but like financially they provided support and resources and opportunities that, the average child being raised by a single mother might not have. And certainly Jess didn't have. And so while both Rory and Jess were very intelligent, Rory got the opportunity to go to a very prestigious prep school where being smart and achieving was seen as cool and was seen as something to strive for. And Jess, on the other hand, clearly didn't have the same opportunity. And based on his behavior by the time we meet him, it's clear that he has internalized the idea that being smart and being a go-getter and trying hard and getting good grades was not the cool thing to do and was not something that was encouraged when he was growing up, which is probably why he has this kind of chip on his shoulder when it comes to school. And the icing on the cake for all of this is that the male figure in Rory's life, the almost pseudo father figure that she had, was Luke. And Luke is Jess's uncle, and yet he never got the benefit of having Luke there for him when he was a child and when he was growing up. And by the time he comes to Stars Hollow, it's almost as though Luke likes Rory more than he likes Jess. And he often draws comparisons and says things that suggest that, you know, Jess should be more like Rory, and Rory will be good for Jess because he wants, you know, Jess to do those things too. So all of those things probably make Jess feel pretty bad about himself in comparison to Rory. And for this reason, their relationship is really toxic, and Jess really doesn't let Rory in, doesn't communicate with her, doesn't connect with her emotionally, really just ices her out, and is struggling with whatever he is struggling with on his own, but all the while making Rory feel like she has somehow done something wrong or is not doing enough or whatever, and thus is making her feel insecure and like his problems are in some way her problems, which obviously they're not. And this whole dynamic sort of culminates in that scene at the party they go to where Jess is brooding and he's gone off to sulk in some room, and Rory of course goes after him to see what's wrong because she's that type. And then he basically almost forces himself on her, but then gets angry when she pushes him away and tells him that this isn't going to happen here. And he yells at her and causes her to run off crying, which then leads to the whole Jess and Dean have a fight at a party thing. And Lorelai's reaction to that was very funny. But anyway, the point is that at that point, really, like, I don't know what Rory was holding on to. Jess had dropped out of school, basically. He was not going to graduate. He had promised to take her to the prom, but he couldn't get tickets because the school wouldn't sell them to him because he wasn't graduating. He doesn't tell Rory any of this. And then one day his father comes into Luke's diner wanting to connect with him, I guess, or see him or whatever. And the next thing you know, Jess packs up and leaves to go visit his father. Not a word to Rory, no explanation, just up and leaves and ghosts her. So Rory misses out on going to her prom. He's not there when she graduates or when she goes off to Yale. And essentially, that's where they leave their relationship. At one point, we see that Rory's been getting these calls where she picks up and nobody says anything on the other end of the line. She's pretty sure they're Jess. And so she sort of confronts him by saying, you know, I'm not going to pine over you. It's done. You know, you didn't handle things correctly. I'm going off to Europe and I'm going off to Yale. I'm going to live my life without you. And I'm like, good for you, Rory. That's how it should be. And that's exactly what she does until he comes back again, like a really bad infection that you just can't shake. And this part of Jess's story and Jess and Rory's story is what I call Jess's redemption arc. But I'm going to qualify that, or perhaps put a bit of an asterisk there, because I'm not 100% convinced about this redemption arc myself, but let me explain. So fast forward to the end of Rory's first year at Yale. She hasn't really seen or heard from Jess. And then Jess comes back to Stars Hollow. They run into each other, whatever. Anyway, they end up having this sort of confrontation at Rory's dorm at Yale. He finds out, I guess, where her dorm is and comes unannounced to see her, to tell her, oh, by the way, Dean was there, but that's a whole other thing, not important. He comes and tells her that she should run away with him, that all of her things are packed, that they belong together, that he's always known it, and that, you know, they can't be together here. Not while she's at Yale, not in Stars Hollow. They need to run off to New York together. They can live together, they can work together. That's what he wanted her to do. And I really just want to emphasize this. He wanted her to drop out of Yale. to be with him in his bum life in New York, okay? Hold that thought, because I think it's important. And this is why. She says no to him, and he runs away with his tail between his legs and goes and licks his wounds or whatever. And then, do you know what he does? He picks himself up off the floor and he gets his life together, because he probably realized that what he asked of her was ridiculous. But he still asked it. He still wanted her to do that, which is, in my opinion, toxic and unforgivable, but come back to that. So he gets his stuff together, pulls himself out of the gutter, writes a book, starts working with this publishing house, like a really small publishing house in Philadelphia. And once again, he finds out where Rory's living and turns up at her place unannounced to tell her that he's written this book. Now, at this point in their story, Rory has had her sort of meltdown, which I'll talk about in the Rory and Logan episode, but she's dropped out of Yale and living at her grandparents' house. And this is where they have that infamous confrontation about how he's like, this isn't you, Rory. You know, I know you. This isn't you. Why did you drop out of Yale?
Grandparents' place? Being in the DAR? No, Yale. Why did you drop out of Yale?
And what has always bothered me about that was the fact that just a year and a bit prior to this scene, he himself had wanted Rory to drop out of Yale for him. And so when he comes back to see her, now that he's gotten his life together, he thinks, okay, I now have a chance with her. I now can show her that I can be somebody. And good for him, by the way, for doing that. Like, I think that that was a great achievement, but it's very clear that he does it for the purpose of impressing her, because he wants to be with her. And, you know, she's not going to drop out of Yale to like meet him in the gutter. So he's got to get himself out of the gutter. Okay, fantastic. But when he comes and sees her and sees that like she's kind of deviated her path, now she has dropped out of Yale, not for him, but in his mind, for this rich guy. Of course, we know she didn't do it, but you can have like imagine from his perspective. He comes to see her. She's got this, you know, she's living in her parents' mansion, maids, etc. She's hosting charity functions and a member of the DAR and doing all of that sort of stuff. She has this wealthy boyfriend. So it's almost like now he can't reach her again, because now she's in a totally different world, a world that he will never inhabit. And in my opinion, his outrage about what has happened to her had less to do with it being a disappointment to him or being like, oh, this isn't you, Rory, this isn't you. No, it had more to do with the fact that he had always probably told himself that Rory was not going to drop out of Yale for anybody and that he was stupid to ask it. And when he finds her having dropped out of Yale for some other guy, some rich guy that Jess could never compete with, okay? Because I'm sorry, like, Jess and Logan, no, like, no competition. I mean, I'm just saying what, you know, just forget about that. Let's forget about that. But the point is, he feels like he can't compete with him. You know, they did butt heads at that dinner, not dinner, whatever. They butted heads. Jess was just like, no, I can't do this. It had less to do with Rory and more about his ego, his fragile, bruised ego, because Rory didn't want to drop out of Yale for him, but she was more than happy to drop out of Yale to live this wealthy, privileged, pampered life. So while that confrontation, yes, was the catalyst to get her back on track, and, you know, that's great, I still do not 100% buy that his motivations in coming to see her and in confronting her about what was happening were pure. His motivations were more selfish than I think most people realize, at least in my opinion. And that's why I said this is kind of a redemption arc for him, because yes, he has really gotten his life together, but I still do not love that he is obsessed with Rory to an unhealthy degree, in my opinion, that he consistently just shows up out of the blue to disrupt her life, that he passes judgment on her life as if he, of all people, has the right to pass judgment. He makes her feel bad about herself and her life choices, which have nothing to do with him, because he feels bad about her life choices because they have nothing to do with him. So this essentially is kind of the last time we see Jess until the revival in any sort of real way, at least in a Rory and Jess sense. Then we come to the revival, and you can kind of see that Rory's life, let's say, has not taken the direction that she might have wanted or anticipated when she was younger. She's flailing and failing, and she's not in a good place. And when we see Rory and Jess again in the revival, it's like he's the one who has it all together and she's just a complete mess. Like, she is a hot mess. And it's almost like the dynamic has shifted now. And I don't love it because, I don't love the direction that Rory's path has taken. But I don't dislike Jess as much in terms of the person that he became when we meet him sort of that 10 years later, I think it is. He is actually no longer a bad influence on her. In fact, he is the one who tells her that she should write a book, which is what she then decides to do. So it will be interesting to see if they do ever continue the story, if Rory and Jess will get together again. I suspect that they would, and I suspect that this time around it might not actually be as bad as it was when they were younger. And I wouldn't necessarily be mad about it, considering like where they are in their lives. But I will say that that particular arc is unrealistic. It is, let's say, on both ends, the least likely outcome that I would say would happen in reality. Because in reality, a guy like Jess is very unlikely to do what the character did. And that's why I give him props, because he really beat the odds. And to be honest, the only reason that he was motivated to do it was because Rory rejected him. She rejected him when he wanted her to drop out of Yale, and this was the catalyst for him to really get himself together. So the best thing that happened to him is Rory's rejection. If they had been together, he would not have done what he did, because he would not have had the same motivation. He would have had her. And then it's like he would have leaned on her to fix him, which never works. And in the end, she would have just been dragged down, her life would have been ruined, and nothing good would have come of it. And so, in my opinion, the moral of the story with guys like Jess is that the best thing you can do for them is to reject them and leave them alone and let them figure out their mess of their life all on their own. And either they will get their stuff together or they won't. But ultimately, it's up to them to fix their life. You are not a rehab center for broken men, and you need to stop trying to fix them. Anyway, that's all I have for you on Rory and Jess. I would love to hear from you guys what you think. Have I changed your mind about Jess? Or are you still a diehard Team Jess fan? Let me know in the comments below, and I hope you have a great day wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.